She was 72 years old, sitting on her own front porch with a cup of black coffee and a half-finished crossword puzzle. Officer Cole decided she was trespassing. What Cole did not know, could not have known in her absolute certainty, that she already understood everything about this situation, was that at that exact moment, 8 of the most lethal operators in the United States military were 38 minutes away, and their commander had just listened to his mother's voicemail. This is the story of the Sunday morning that ended a career. Stay with it. The ending will change how you think about strength. The Georgia sun came up slow on Sycamore Lane, the way it always did in late October. Not the aggressive blaze of summer, but something gentler and almost apologetic sliding through the gap between the old oak trees and settling across the front yards of Cedarville like a warm hand placed carefully on a shoulder. The leaves had just begun to turn. The maples at the end of the block were running orange at their edges, and the big sweet gum in front of the Hendersons' place had gone a deep, complicated burgundy that Eleanor Washington had been looking forward to since August, when the heat was relentless and the idea of October felt like a rumor. She was already on this porch when it happened. She had been there since 6:15, which was her habit on Sundays, the one morning of the week when she permitted herself the luxury of waking up without purpose. 38 years of 5:30 alarms, 38 years of lesson plans and faculty meetings and parent conferences and budget reviews and the 1,000 small crises that constitute the life of a school principal had made Sunday mornings feel like a gift she had personally negotiated out of the universe. She took them seriously. She took them slowly. The coffee was black. It was always black. Her late husband Marcus had taken his with cream and 2 sugars, and for the first 3 years after he passed, she had found herself reaching for the cream out of habit, before remembering. And the remembering had been its own small grief every single time, precise and sharp. The way a paper cut is sharp, the way small things can hold large losses. Now she drank it black without thinking about it, which was either healing or forgetting. And she had decided some years ago that the distinction did not much matter as long as she kept moving. The Bible on the table beside her was worn soft at the spine, the cover faded from burgundy to a kind of dusty rose. She was not reading it this morning. It sat there, the way it always sat there on Sundays, present familiar a form of company. The crossword puzzle from the Friday paper was folded beside it. She had completed about 2/3 of it the night before and left the rest for this morning, which was her version of delayed gratification. The remaining clues were the harder ones. She preferred to meet the harder ones rested. Eleanor Washington was 72 years old, and she had built this life with her own hands. That was not a metaphor. The porch she was sitting on, the wide front porch with the gray-painted boards and the white railing and the wicker chair whose cushion had molded itself to the exact dimensions of her frame over 15 years, she and Marcus had built it themselves in the summer of 2004. 3 weekends, Marcus measuring and cutting the boards with a focus that bordered on the religious. Eleanor sanding and painting each plank, then arguing cheerfully with him about whether the railing posts needed to be 16 or 20 inches apart. 20 inches had won. The railing had never wobbled. She thought of that every time she put her hand on it. She had paid off the mortgage in 2011. Paid it off early, in fact, because Eleanor Washington did not like owing things to anyone or anything. She had written the final check herself, driven it to the bank. Herself stood at the teller's window while the woman on the other side processed it with the pleasant indifference of someone for whom this was just another transaction in a long day of transactions. Eleanor had driven home and sat on this porch with a glass of sweet tea and felt something she could only describe as arrival, the specific satisfaction of a woman who had been traveling toward something for a very long time and had finally quietly gotten there. She had lived in Cedarville for 17 years. She knew every family on this block by name and by habit. She was on the HOA board. She had organized the neighborhood's emergency contact phone tree, a laminated copy of which was on the refrigerator of every house on Sycamore Lane. She knew which neighbors left their trash cans out a day too long, and which ones swept their sidewalks every Saturday, and which ones would bring her tomatoes from their garden in August without being asked. She also knew what she looked like sitting on this porch in this neighborhood. This was not bitterness. Eleanor Washington had worked too hard and loved too much, and lost enough to understand that bitterness was a weight you chose to carry, and she had chosen not to. But she was also not naive, and she had been a black woman in America for 72 years, which meant she understood certain things about perception and assumption, and the way those things could turn a pleasant Sunday morning into something else entirely without warning. She had what she privately called the reflex. It had been with her since childhood, sharpened by decades of navigating white spaces, white school boards, white superintendents' offices, white neighborhood associations with care. It was not fear, it was readiness, the part of her brain that was always underneath everything else paying attention. The reflex was what made her notice the squad car. It appeared at the end of Sycamore Lane at 7:43 in the morning. She noticed it the way she noticed most things, quietly, without alarm. Her eyes lifting from the unfinished crossword and tracking the vehicle as it moved slowly down the street. It was not speeding to a call. It was not passing through. It was moving with the particular deliberateness of a vehicle whose driver was looking for something or had already found it and was deciding what to do. Eleanor set her coffee cup down. She placed the crossword on top of the Bible. She folded her hands in her lap and she waited. She had earned this peace. She had built this porch with her own hands. She had paid for this house, planted these flowers, and in this chair, on 1,000 Sunday mornings without incident. She waited anyway. The squad car stopped directly in front of her house. The officer who got out was younger than Eleanor had expected. Mid-30s, she estimated, though something about the set of her jaw made her look older. She was a white woman with dark blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, the kind of bun that communicated efficiency and also a certain refusal of softness. Her uniform was pressed. Her boots were clean. She wore the expression Eleanor had seen 1,000 times across faculty tables and conference rooms, the expression of someone who had already made up their mind before the conversation started and was now simply moving through the formality of having it. Her name tag read D. Cole. Her hand rested on her duty belt as she walked toward the porch. Not on her weapon exactly, but near enough to it that the proximity was its own kind of message. Eleanor had spent 38 years reading people. She had read furious parents and frightened teenagers and lying vice principals and exhausted teachers on the edge of quitting and board members who smiled at her face while voting against her proposals. She had learned to look past what people said and watch what their bodies did, the specific way they held themselves when they were operating from certainty versus fear, from conviction versus performance. What she saw in Officer Danielle Cole was certainty. Not confidence earned through knowledge, certainty that preceded it. The certainty of someone who had written the story of this interaction before she got out of the car. Cole's eyes swept the porch with the practiced scan of someone cataloging evidence. The wicker chair, the coffee cup, the worn Bible, the folded newspaper, the house slippers on Eleanor's feet, the thin cardigan over her Sunday dress. Eleanor herself, 72 years old, 5 feet 3 inches, sitting quietly with her hands in her lap on a Sunday morning in front of her own home. Eleanor said good morning first. It was the principal in her. She had always believed that whoever spoke first in a difficult room took the first step toward controlling its temperature. She said good morning in the voice she had used for 4 decades to calm frightened children and redirect angry parents, steady, warm, and completely unafraid. Cole did not return the greeting. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at Eleanor with an expression that was not quite hostile, but was several degrees below civil. The expression of someone communicating that pleasantries were a waste of time better spent establishing authority. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Cole. We received a call about suspicious activity in this neighborhood." Eleanor let the pause run for a moment. Silence was a tool. She had learned long ago that most people, especially people operating from manufactured certainty, were uncomfortable with silence and would rush to fill it. Cole did not fill it. She just looked at Eleanor waiting. And Eleanor thought, here we are then. What she understood about Danielle Cole in those first 30 seconds was something she had understood about certain people her entire professional life. This was not about a call. The call was a pretext, possibly real, possibly not. It did not matter. What this was about was something older and more personal. Cole had grown up somewhere that taught her that certain people in certain places were out of place by definition. Not because of anything they'd done, because of what they looked like and what their presence in a particular neighborhood was supposed to imply to a particular kind of mind. Eleanor had encountered this before. She had encountered it in school board meetings and neighborhood association votes and real estate offices and grocery stores in parts of town that certain people felt entitled to police with their eyes. She had learned to recognize it the way you learn to recognize a weather pattern, not with surprise, not with rage, but with a kind of weary and calibrated accuracy. She also knew with the calm clarity of someone who had spent 4 decades in difficult rooms and always walked out of them that Officer Danielle Cole was about to make the worst mistake of her professional life. And she knew she was going to let her make it. All of it. Every step of it. Because the camera on Cole's chest was running. And Eleanor had built her entire career on the understanding that the record always matters, and right now the record was watching. Suspicious activity, Eleanor repeated. Not with sarcasm, with precision, the same gentle insistence on exactness she had used for 38 years with anyone who stated something imprecisely when precision was required. What specific activity was reported? Officer Cole's jaw tightened. The small muscle at the corner jumped. This was the question she had not expected or had expected and resented, which in Cole's framework amounted to the same thing. I'll ask the questions, ma'am. She took a step up onto the first porch step, a territorial claim disguised as procedure. I need to see your ID. I'm happy to show you my identification, Eleanor said. She had not moved. Her hands were still folded in her lap, her posture still composed, her voice. Still the voice that had made auditoriums of restless teenagers go quiet without raising it. I'd like to understand first what was reported as suspicious. I've been sitting on this porch for the past hour and a half. Ma'am, you're being uncooperative. I'm being precise, Eleanor said. There's a difference. And there was the flicker barely a moment gone before it fully arrived where something in Cole's expression shifted. It might have been in a person with more self-awareness the first edge of doubt, but it was only a flicker, and what replaced it was the harder, more committed version of what had been there from the start. Stand up, Cole said. I need to see your ID right now. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then, my purse is inside. I'll need to retrieve it. Don't move. Cole's hand went to her radio. Dispatch, I have a possible trespasser at 1247 Sycamore Lane refusing to identify, requesting backup. I said I would get my identification, Eleanor said, and her voice had not risen, but something behind it had a new weight, the weight of someone who has been patient past the point where patience should be necessary. It's inside my home. Your home. Cole's tone made the words into something else. Something that communicated that the claim itself was suspect. That the very idea required scrutiny before it could be taken seriously. I am not claiming anything, Eleanor said. I am Eleanor May Washington. I have lived at this address for 17 years. My name is on the deed, the utility bills, and the mailbox at the end of this driveway. If you check your cruiser's property records in the next 90 seconds, you will find my name there as well. My purse is on my kitchen counter, and my identification is in it. I will retrieve it the moment you step back and allow me to do so. Cole looked at her notepad, then back at Eleanor. I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. The words hit Eleanor the way cold water hits total immediate full body. She sat very still for a moment. Her heart was moving faster. She could feel it. She had the strange dissociated clarity of someone in the middle of something terrible and unreal, the part of the brain that steps to the side of fear and begins taking notes instead. She was aware of the neighbors. She was aware of the body cam lens on Cole's chest pointing at both of them recording. She was aware of the crossword on the table and of her coffee cup still steaming. Officer Cole, she said, and her voice was completely steady, and she meant every word of what came next. With the full weight of 72 years. You are making a mistake you will not be able to undo. I want you to remember that I told you that, and I want you to remember that I told you before anything further happened. Cole pulled the handcuffs from her belt. The only mistake, she said, is you thinking you can sit here and play games with me. Turn around now. Eleanor looked into Danielle Cole's eyes. She did not find hatred there. She found something she had always considered more dangerous than hatred, absolute certainty. The certainty of someone who has already decided how this story ends and who lacks the imagination or the willingness to consider that the story might be more complicated than they've allowed. She thought of her son. Then she turned around. The handcuffs went on wrong from the start. Not wrong in the sense of improperly applied, Cole knew the mechanics. Wrong in the sense of too tight deliberately, so with the particular tightness that communicated something beyond procedure. Eleanor felt the steel ratchet down past the point of security and into the point of punishment, and she said in the voice she would have used to inform a student that something was wrong with the classroom temperature. "Officer, these cuffs are cutting into my wrists." Cole said, "They're fine." They were not fine. Eleanor had had carpal tunnel surgery on her right wrist 3 years ago. The surgeon had told her the scar tissue would always be more sensitive than normal tissue, that the radial nerve running along the heel of her palm would need to be treated carefully for the rest of her life. The steel band of the handcuff was sitting directly on that scar. Eleanor could already feel the particular burning sensation that was distinct from ordinary pain, the burning of pressure on something that had been carefully repaired and was not supposed to be damaged again. She did not say any of this. She had understood with complete clarity that any further complaint would be written down as resistance. She had been in enough situations, different situations, professional ones, but situations nonetheless, to understand how documents got written after the fact. How a woman asking a reasonable question became a woman being belligerent. How a person exercising a right became a person obstructing an officer. She had read enough incident reports over the years to know exactly what Coles would say before Cole had written a single word of it. "Step off the porch," Cole said, her hand pressing against Eleanor's shoulder blade. Not a push exactly. Directional pressure. Steering. Eleanor's house slippers made a soft scraping sound against the boards she and Marcus had painted together on a Saturday afternoon in the summer of 2004, the two of them arguing about the exact shade of gray and finally agreeing that the one they'd chosen was right. The wood was familiar under her feet. She knew every board which one had a slight give in the middle, the exact depth of each step, the way the railing felt under her palm. She could have walked these steps blindfolded. She could not walk them with her hands locked behind her back. Her center of gravity was wrong. The house slippers had no traction. On the third step, her foot slipped. It happened fast, and for one elongated, terrible second, she was pitching forward with nothing between her face and the concrete walkway below except air. Cole caught her arm, not gently, but she caught it. "Watch your step," she said. The casual cruelty of those 3 words, the way they transformed Cole's own negligence into Eleanor's personal clumsiness as if the danger had arrived from nowhere and Eleanor had simply failed to navigate it, took Eleanor's breath away more completely than the near fall had. She steadied herself, found her footing, and kept walking. She did not look down. She kept her spine straight and her chin level. Because she had been walking into difficult rooms with her head up for 72 years, and she was not going to stop now on the porch steps of her own house. Across the street, Robert Tanner had stopped moving. Robert was 58 years old and had spent 25 years as a firefighter before his knee gave out, and in all that time he had developed the specific instinct of someone whose profession required him to know immediately and without deliberation when something was wrong. He had been washing his truck in his driveway when the squad car had stopped, and he had been watching with increasing unease for the past several minutes, and now he was walking toward Sycamore Lane with the purposeful stride of a man who had made a decision. "Hey!" he called out. His voice carried easily across the quiet morning. "Hey, that's Mrs. Washington. What is going on over there?" "Sir, step back," Cole said without slowing. "This is police business." "Police business? She lives there. I've known her for 12 years." Robert had reached the edge of Eleanor's lawn, and he stopped there because he understood the geometry of the situation well enough to know that crossing onto the property gave Cole a second target and solved nothing. "It's all right, Robert." Eleanor's voice cut through cleanly, not loud, but carrying still the voice that had managed difficult situations for 4 decades. "Please don't put yourself at risk. Just call my son. His number is on the neighborhood phone tree. Call James. Just call James." "I'm calling him right now," Robert said. He already had his phone out. "This is wrong, officer. This woman is the homeowner. I will testify to that in any court you want to put me in." Cole ignored him. She had Eleanor at the squad car now. Her hand came down on top of Eleanor's head to guide her into the back seat, not guiding, pressing the specific motion of someone in a hurry or making a point, or both. And Eleanor did not move fast enough, and her knee caught the doorframe, and a bolt of pain shot up her leg, and she said, "That hurts," in a voice that was still controlled. And Cole said, "Should have moved faster," and Eleanor filed those words away in the part of her mind, Anishinai, that was not feeling pain or fear or indignation, the part that was still quietly taking notes. She landed in the back seat at an awkward angle, her cuffed hands trapped beneath her, her shoulder connecting hard with the opposite door. The nerve pain in her right wrist had become something radiating and constant. She shifted as best she could in the small plastic space and looked out the window. More neighbors had come out. The elderly Perryman couple stood on their porch across the street, Mrs. Perryman's hand over her mouth. A young woman in scrubs, who Eleanor recognized as a traveling nurse, stood at the edge of the sidewalk, phone raised, recording everything. A college-aged young man, one of the Williams children home for fall break, was calling out to neighbors to document, to witness, to keep filming. Cole got into the driver's seat and started the engine. Through the rear window, Eleanor watched her porch recede. The coffee cup still on the table. The steam gone now, but the cup still there. The crossword waiting for her to come back and finish it. From the front seat, in a voice low enough that Cole perhaps did not intend Eleanor to hear it clearly. Or perhaps she did not care. "You people always think the rules don't apply." Eleanor closed her eyes. She was not afraid. She was clear-headed and methodical, and she was thinking about the camera on Cole's chest still running, and about what it had captured this morning on Sycamore Lane, and about the fact that she had been right about one thing all along. The record always matters. She thought about her son. She had one phone call to make, and she knew exactly what she was going to say. The Cedarville Police Department on Hamilton Street had been built in 1978 and had not been substantially renovated since. The parking lot had cracks the Georgia summers kept widening. The lobby smelled permanently of old coffee. Cleaning solution and the particular staleness of air recirculated through the same vents for 40 years. On Sunday mornings at 8 o'clock, it was mostly empty. Sergeant Gary Hollis was at the watch commander's desk when Cole brought Eleanor through the doors. Hollis was 51 years old, 23 years with Cedarville PD. He looked up from his desk when they came in, registered the situation with a brief sweep of his eyes, a 72-year-old black woman in house slippers, handcuffed, and returned to his paperwork without a single question. This was the thing that stayed with Eleanor longer than anything Cole had done. Cole was operating from something ugly and personal. Hollis was operating from something worse, an indifference so complete it had become institutional, an invisibility so practiced it had stopped registering as a choice. In 23 years, he had seen this particular picture enough times that it no longer struck him as remarkable. That normalization was its own form of participation, and Eleanor, who had spent her career fighting for children who felt invisible, recognized it with the weary accuracy of someone who has named a thing many times and is tired of naming it. Cole marched her through the bullpen. 4 officers present, all on the early shift. 2 at desks typing, 1 on the phone, 1 refilling coffee at the break room door. Not one of them said anything. Not one of them looked for more than a second at the 72-year-old woman in house slippers being walked through their workplace at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning. No questions, no raised eyebrows. The casual invisibility of someone who had already been categorized. The processing room was exactly as cold as it looked. Cinder block walls in institutional beige. A metal table bolted to the floor. A metal chair. Cameras in 2 corners, recording lights, small and red and steady. The air conditioning was set for a room that would be occupied by people who were agitated and warm, not for a 72-year-old woman in a thin cardigan who had been sitting in the gentle October morning air. "Sit," Cole said. Eleanor sat. The chair forced her to lean slightly forward, which pulled on her already stressed shoulders. She'd had rotator cuff problems for years. The handcuffs had been on for 22 minutes. The burning in her right wrist had become something specific and alarming, a deep radiating ache she recognized from before her carpal tunnel surgery as nerve pain, the quality of pain that comes from something being compressed that should not be compressed. "Officer Cole," she said quietly, keeping her voice measured and informational rather than pleading, because she understood the difference mattered and how it would be recorded mattered. I need these handcuffs removed or at minimum repositioned to the front. I had carpal tunnel surgery on my right wrist 3 years ago. The cuff is sitting directly on the surgical site. I am experiencing nerve pain. Everyone has something, Cole said. She had a form in front of her now and clicked her pen with theatrical boredom, the performance of someone demonstrating that the conversation they are not having is beneath them. Let's start with basics. Name, you know my name. For the record, Eleanor May Washington, the same name on the deed to the house you removed me from. The same name I have stated to you 3 times since you arrived on my porch. Cole's pen moved. Eleanor could not see what she was writing, but she understood what it would say. Occupation, retired principal. Cedarville Unified School District. 38 years. Cole's pen paused. Then it moved again. Eleanor did not need to see what was written. The angle of Cole's wrist and the pace of the writing told her enough. We'll process you as Jane Doe. Cole said, until you can provide verification. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then, you cannot be serious. Do I look like I'm joking? For the next 20 minutes, Cole filled out Eleanor's processing forms with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times and expected to continue doing it without consequence. She wrote occupation unknown, despite Eleanor having stated her occupation clearly. She wrote non-compliant and refused to identify an aggressive behavior in the narrative section of the arrest report, and she did it without self-consciousness, the way a person does something they have refined into routine. At one point, Cole set her pen down, leaned back and said, "You know what's funny? People like you love to talk about rights. But when it comes to following simple instructions, suddenly all those rights matter more than basic respect." People like me, Eleanor repeated, slowly, the same way she had always repeated things back to people who needed to hear what they had actually said. Cole held her gaze. Something moved in her eyes, a brief awareness of what she had said, of the specific weight of those 3 words, of the fact that the camera on her chest was still recording. It lasted less than a second. Then it was gone, replaced by the harder, more settled version of what had been there before. I mean, people who think they're above the law. I'm not above the law, Eleanor said. I am one of the people the law is supposed to protect. There's a difference. You might want to think carefully about whether you've spent this morning protecting me or doing something else entirely. Cole stood up. I'm going to give you 30 minutes to reconsider your attitude. When I come back, we can talk about your phone call. I have a right to that call now. You'll get it when I'm ready. Eleanor looked at her directly. My name is Eleanor May Washington. My address is 1247 Sycamore Lane, Cedarville, Georgia. I was a school principal for 38 years. I have never been arrested. I have never had a speeding ticketed. I have owned my home outright since 2011. She paused. And I have a son. I want my phone call. Cole stopped at the door. She turned back, and on her face was the expression Eleanor had seen on people who have been given information that does not fit their predetermined story and have decided to discard the information rather than revise the story. Sure you do, Cole said. The words came with a small, contemptuous curl. You know what's sad? You actually think someone's coming to save you. She looked at Eleanor with something that was almost pity. The thin, condescending pity of someone who believes they are looking at delusion. Nobody's coming, Jane Doe. Nobody cares. The door closed. Heavy, solid, final. Eleanor sat alone in the cold room, her hands still cuffed behind her. The nerve pain in her right wrist, a constant presence. Now the camera in the corner blinking its steady red eye at her. She looked at it. Good, she thought. Keep looking. Keep recording. Every second of this. She thought about Marcus. She thought about the summer they built the porch, how he had laughed when she miscounted the railing posts, and they had to pull 3 of them out and start over, laughed without a trace of exasperation, because he was that kind of man. Patient in the way of someone who understood that the goal was the porch, not the counting. She thought about her son, about the one phone call she was going to make. She sat up straighter because Marcus would have told her to, and she waited. It was Deputy Marcus Webb who came for her. He was 29 years old and had been with Cedarville PD for 14 months, still new enough to feel things that longer service had taught some of his colleagues not to feel. He had been uncomfortable since the moment Eleanor was brought in. He had not said anything because 14 months was not long enough to have earned the standing to question a 6-year veteran's arrest. But the discomfort had been growing, and when he passed the processing room door and heard nothing but silence from inside it for a long stretch, it became something he could not continue to sit with. He came in quietly. Hollis was preoccupied in the back. Cole was at her desk. Webb opened the door and said low enough not to carry ma'am. "You're entitled to a phone call. You can make it now." Eleanor assessed him the way she had always assessed people, quickly, accurately, with the specific instinct of someone who had spent a career trying to figure out who in a difficult room could be reached. "Thank you," she said simply. Webb uncuffed her right hand, not completely, just enough to give her the use of it, and handed her his personal cell phone rather than the precinct phone, which required logging. This quiet, unremarked decision would matter later in ways neither of them knew yet. Eleanor's right hand trembled slightly as she held the phone. The blood returning to the compressed nerves made her fingers tingle, then burn. She could not feel her thumb. She dialed from memory and held the phone to her ear. 4 rings, then James's voicemail. His voice 3 sentences measured and direct, and then the tone. Eleanor took a breath. She organized what she needed to say the way she had always organized difficult communications, led with the essential information, follow with the context, close with the emotional truth. "James," she said, "it's Mama. I'm at the Cedarville Police Department on Hamilton Street. I was arrested this morning on the porch. I'm physically okay, but my right wrist is in some pain. The officer's name is Cole." She paused. Then, "Baby, I'm fine. Take your time. But come." She handed the phone back to Webb. He took it. His face was carefully neutral, in the way of someone managing what they are feeling rather than not feeling it. He recuffed her right hand more loosely. This time she noticed the steel resting against her wrist, rather than biting into it, a small and wordless act of decency, and he left the room. Eleanor sat alone again. 51 minutes in handcuffs. She could not feel her right thumb. The nerve pain had become a pulse, deep, radiating in time with her heartbeat. She was cold. The cardigan was not enough for this room. She thought about the last time she had seen James 3 months ago, when he had come home on leave and spent 5 days on Sycamore Lane. He had been quieter than usual, carrying the particular kind of quiet that accumulates in people who spend their professional lives in places where the wrong kind of noise gets people killed. He had checked the locks on her doors 3 times over the course of the visit, moving through the house in the evenings, quietly, systematically, trying each lock and the deadbolt and the chain. She might not have noticed if she hadn't been his mother for 44 years and known exactly how he moved when he was assessing something. He had asked about her neighbors, whether she felt safe on the block. She had laughed it off. He had said, "Mom, if anything happens, anything at all, you call me first. I don't care what time. I don't care where I am. You call me first." She had thought he was being overprotective. The particular overprotection of a man who had spent his adult life in places where danger was constant and real, and had never fully learned to turn off the assessment. Now she understood that he had simply known something she hadn't yet known she needed to know. She closed her eyes and waited. The briefing room at the Naval Special Warfare Development Group facility had no windows. Windows were distractions, and the men in this room operated in environments where distractions were measured in lives, so the rooms where they planned and prepared and rehearsed were designed to be unambiguous, bare walls, good lighting, one purpose. Commander James Washington stood at the front with a laser pointer and a satellite image of a 3-story building projected behind him. He was 44 years old, 6 feet 1 inch, built like a man who had spent 2 decades using his body as an instrument of precision rather than a symbol of anything. His face, in repose, had the quality of someone whose default expression was sustained alertness, not coldness, but the readiness of a person who had been paying attention for so long that attention had become his natural state. His team was arranged in a rough semicircle. 8 men who had worked alongside him for 3 years, carrying the specific kind of trust that only forms between people who have been in genuinely dangerous places together and come back. There was Chief Petty Officer Raymond Davis, 41, the most experienced non-commissioned officer in the room, and more importantly, the person James trusted most to tell him when he was wrong, a quality rarer and more valuable than any tactical skill. There was Lieutenant Derek Cole, 28, the youngest, who had an engineer's brain and a very dry sense of humor, and who had met Eleanor Washington 6 months ago on a visit to Cedarville, eaten 3 servings of her sweet potato pie without being asked twice, and sent her a handwritten thank you note afterward. There was Petty Officer First Class Thomas Williams, who handled communications. Petty Officer First Class Andre Jackson, whose specialty was entry getting through any door lock or barrier that needed to be gotten through. And Dr. Emmanuel Okafor, the team's medical officer, who had been born in Lagos and educated at Johns Hopkins and operated in 12 countries, and who had, on a Sunday afternoon in Cedarville the previous spring, played checkers with Eleanor on her front porch and lost 4 games straight with great good humor. James was walking them through the fatal funnel, the most dangerous point in any building entry, where statistics said most operators got killed when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. During briefings, the phone stayed silent unless it was an emergency. This was a rule he applied without exception. The phone buzzed again, then again. Lieutenant Cole raised his hand. "Commander, you should probably get that." James did not look at his pocket. Briefing continues. 3 more buzzes in rapid succession. A pattern that communicated urgency, not impatience. He pulled the phone from his pocket and looked at it for exactly 1 second. 7 missed calls. 3 from Georgia area codes he did not recognize. 4 from Robert Tanner, Sycamore Lane. Robert Tanner. James had never needed to call Robert Tanner. Robert's number existed in his phone for one reason: the emergency contact protocol his mother had established for her neighborhood, the laminated list she had organized herself and put on every refrigerator on the block, because Eleanor May Washington spent her life making sure that when something went wrong, people knew who to call. "Take 5, James said. His voice had shifted, not louder, not harder, but different in a way that was immediately audible to men who had worked with him for 3 years and who knew what his different registers meant. He stepped into the hallway and called Robert back. Robert answered on the first ring, "Jay." "Thank God. It's your mom." James listened. He had the particular skill of very good field commanders, the ability to receive complex, emotionally charged information and process it, without the emotion changing the quality of the processing. He let Robert tell the whole story without interrupting. The officer, the porch, the handcuffs, the way Eleanor had been pushed into the squad car, the way she had asked for James, specifically told Robert to call him in a voice Robert described as Calm Jay. Way too calm, like she'd been waiting her whole life for exactly this kind of thing, and she already knew what to do. James stood in the corridor outside the briefing room for 14 seconds after the call ended. Through the glass wall, his team watched him without pretending not to. They had learned to read him the way sailors read weather. Not from individual signals, but from the total pattern, the set of his shoulders, the pace of his breathing, the particular stillness that settled over him when he was converting information into decision. He opened the briefing room door. "My mother was arrested at her own home this morning," he said. "Cedarville, Georgia. She's been in custody for approximately 55 minutes. She called me." He paused for exactly 2 seconds. "I'm going to get her." He let the silence sit. "Here's what I know," he said. The voice of someone laying out mission parameters, no editorializing, just variables. "Distance to Cedarville, 38 minutes at speed. My mother is 72 years old. She has had carpal tunnel surgery on her right wrist. The arresting officer applied handcuffs against my mother's expressed request to loosen them. She has been in those handcuffs for 55 minutes. A pause. She called me first, which tells me she doesn't want to wait for a lawyer. She wants this over." He looked at his team. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," he said. "This is not a sanctioned operation. There is no authorization chain I can invoke for this. What I'm about to do will likely result in a formal review and possibly a board of inquiry, and I want every person in this room to understand that before they make any decision. If you want to stay here, stay. I will understand it, and I will hold nothing against anyone." He waited. Chief Petty Officer Raymond Davis stood up first. Davis did not speak. He had a daughter, Eleanor's age, and a mother who had died 3 years ago, and he had eaten Eleanor's sweet potato pie and listened to her talk about Marcus and the porch they had built together. And he had understood on that visit what James had always known, that Eleanor Washington was the foundation under a good man. You do not let someone's foundation get handcuffed on her own porch. Davis stood up and moved toward the armory without a word. Lieutenant Derek Cole stood next. "She sent me a birthday card," he said. "Remembered I liked peach cobbler and included a recipe. She wrote at the bottom, 'In case the Navy doesn't feed you right.'" He paused. "Let's go." Dr. Okafor was already moving. He did not explain himself. He had reasons, and they were private, and he had learned long ago that the best reasons usually were. Williams Jackson and the remaining 3 operators rose one by one without drama, without declaration. They rose because they had decided, and when these men had decided something, there was nothing more to say. James looked at them for a moment. There was something in his chest that was not tactics or calculation. It was the thing that existed underneath all of those things, and he did not say what it was, and these men did not need him to. "Non-lethal, only," he said, clear and flat and professional. "We are not at war with police officers. We are extracting a civilian from unlawful detention and preserving evidence of a federal civil rights violation. Minimum necessary force. We go in, we get my mother, we secure the evidence package, we get out clean." He looked at each face. "Questions?" There were no questions. "Gear up. We roll in 5. He made one phone call before they moved. Captain William Stokes answered on the second ring, with the alertness of a man who had been in the Navy long enough to know that Sunday morning calls before 9 were rarely casual. "Adams, talk to me." Sir James said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." He told him everything efficiently. The way he briefed mission parameters, who, what, when, where current status, intended action, legal exposure. He told Stokes exactly what he planned to do and why, and he told him clearly that he was calling as professional courtesy and acknowledgement of the chain of command, not as a request for permission, because he had already made this decision, and informing his commanding officer was the right thing to do, regardless of what Stokes said next. Stokes was quiet. James had served under him for 4 years and knew the quality of his silences. This one was practical arithmetic, not moral, because the moral equation was obvious, but the calculation of how something could be done and documented and defended in the light of day afterward. "Your mother," Stokes said finally. "Eleanor." "Yes, sir." A longer pause. "Then you've got 35 minutes before I have to start making calls up the chain. Make it count. A beat. And Adams, don't make me regret this." "No, sir. Get her out." James put his phone away and walked to the armory. The team was already moving with the fluid efficiency of people who had done versions of this 100 times in harder places. Williams was configuring the communications package, the capability to sever the precinct's external signals selectively and temporarily, a tool designed for operational security during sensitive missions now being repurposed for a police station in Georgia. Jackson was checking his breaching toolkit. Okafor was packing the medical assessment kit with the focused care of someone who was already thinking clinically about what he might find. James briefed the operation the way he briefed all operations. Direct, complete, no ambiguity. Williams would establish signal disruption 30 seconds before entry. The front entrance, the public lobby door, was the preferred point of entry, unlocked, requiring no force. Davis and James would go directly to holding. Okafor would assess Eleanor on immediate contact. The remaining operators would secure the perimeter and interior, ensuring nothing was communicated to the outside and no evidence was altered or destroyed. Evidence was the second priority. Body cam footage, arrest reports, booking records, the Jane Doe processing paperwork. Any communication logs related to the original call. All of it downloaded to an encrypted drive and simultaneously uploaded to a secure federal server before anyone had a chance to decide what needed to disappear. "One more thing," James said as he fastened his plate carrier. He looked at his team. "My mother goes first. Before I address anyone, before I speak to any officer, I go to her. Everything else comes after. He paused. Understood. Every head in the room nodded. Let's go. Officer Danielle Cole was deep into her arrest report and feeling good about it. Not in a way she would have articulated. She was not the kind of person who examined her own satisfactions closely enough to name them. But the report was going well. She had a gift for this kind of writing institutional narrative that made one version of events the only version that used the careful vocabulary of procedure to present itself as neutral description while actually constructing an argument. Subject refused multiple lawful commands. Subject displayed escalating non-compliance. Officer determined reasonable suspicion based on observable indicators. 6 years had made her fluent in this. The complaint system had absorbed everything she'd produced. Internal review had cleared her every time. In Cole's experience, documents didn't tell the truth. They told whatever story was written in them with enough confidence, and Cole wrote with confidence. She was 3 paragraphs from finished when Hollis called out from the desk. James, you've got 7 callbacks from some guy named Tanner. He won't stop calling about your Jane Doe. Cole smiled. Let him call. By the time anyone figures out what happened, this is already processed. She turned back to her keyboard. And then the desk phone rang, and Hollis answered it, and his expression changed not dramatically, just a small downward shift at the corners of his mouth, the expression of a man encountering something that doesn't quite fit his framework. Cedarville PD, who's calling? He listened. His frown deepened. Naval Special Warfare Command. Right. And what is this regarding? A pause. A detainee. We have multiple detainees. You'll need to be more. Another pause longer this time. Then, hello? Hello? He looked at the receiver. She hung up. Cole looked up. Prank probably. But Hollis did not look certain. He tried to call back. Frowned. Line's dead. He jiggled the receiver. Use your cell. Cole picked up her phone. No signal. No bars. She stared at it for a moment, refreshed it. Still nothing. Around the bullpen, she could see other officers checking their own phones with the same confusion. The radio on Hollis's desk crackled twice, produced a long burst of static, and went silent. What in the Hollis smacked it? Nothing. Cole was already on her feet. The phones, the radios, the cell service. All at once. That did not happen from a power surge or an equipment failure. That was not a coincidence. That was a pattern, and patterns had causes. She walked to the front window and looked out at Hamilton Street. She counted the vehicles. She did not recognize a black SUV with no front plate parked across the street, engine off. A panel van near the corner, engine running, side door open exactly 2 inches. She looked up, scanning the roofline of the hardware store directly across from the precinct. There was someone on that roof. The figure was still completely still, in the specific way that trained people are still, not the stillness of someone resting, but the stillness of someone who has decided not to move and is carrying out that decision with absolute discipline. Hollis, Cole said, and her voice came out different than she intended. Lower, less steady. We need to secure the building. Something's wrong. What's wrong? She looked back at the exterior. The SUV was still there. The van was still there. But there was a third vehicle now, on the far side. She had not seen it arrive, which meant it had arrived without her noticing, which meant it had been positioned deliberately out of her direct sight line and moved into place when she was looking elsewhere. That was tactical. That was planned. Cole thought about the old woman in the processing room. She thought about the way Eleanor had looked at her when she walked out. Not angry, not afraid, but something that might have been, if Cole had been paying better attention, a specific kind of patience. The patience of someone who is waiting for something she already knows is coming. Cole thought about what Eleanor had said. You are making a mistake you will not be able to undo. She pulled up the property record for 1247 Sycamore Lane on her computer before she fully understood why she was doing it. The system was loading slowly, the network degrading. She realized not crashed but throttled another piece of the pattern, and then it resolved. And there it was. Owner of record Eleanor May Washington. Purchase date 2006. Mortgage status paid in full. Cole stared at the screen for a moment. The lights went out. Not flickering this time. Out. The emergency lighting kicked in immediately, dim and red. casting the bullpen in the color of something about to happen. The backup generator hummed somewhere in the building's infrastructure. Cole's hand went to her service weapon. Around her, other officers were doing the same, the casual posture of a Sunday morning shift hardening into something alert and uncertain. "Everyone stay calm," Hollis said, but his voice had lost its authority. "It's probably just the streetlights are still on," Cole said quietly, looking out the window. "The traffic signal is working. Every building on this block has power." She turned to face the room. "Just us. Just this building." She paused. "That's targeted." Through the window, in the spaces between the streetlights, red laser dots began to appear on the exterior walls. They moved with methodical precision, not randomly, not searching, covering windows, marking positions, establishing a field of overlapping coverage so comprehensive that there was no point on the building's exterior that was not within the sight line of at least two of them, dozens of them. "Oh God," someone behind her whispered. Cole stood at the window and looked at the constellation of red dots on the walls of her precinct, and she felt for the first time in the entire morning the specific sensation of having made a calculation she could not take back. "Nobody's coming," she had said. The front door's electronic lock cycled once, twice, 3 times, testing itself, confirming it could open whenever the person controlling it decided. Nobody cares. The lock cycled a 4th time, and then it clicked open. The door swung inward on its hinges, smooth and quiet, as though the building itself had simply decided to cooperate. The men who came through it moved in a way that Cole could not fully process in the moment. She would try to describe it afterward, and the best she could manage was they moved like water, finding every space, covering every angle, with the unhurried efficiency of people who had done this in places where the cost of doing it wrong was permanent. There was no chaos, no theatrical aggression, just the compressed, purposeful motion of people who knew exactly what they were doing and had done harder versions of it before breakfast. Commands were delivered once at conversational volume. "Hands. Everyone show me hands. On the ground. Do not reach for anything. Clear. Professional. Non-negotiable." Every officer in the building was disarmed and secured within 90 seconds. Not roughly. No one was struck with anything beyond the minimum necessary to create compliance. But the precision of it was more frightening than violence would have been, the specific precision of people who were calibrating their force to exactly what was required, and not one unit more, which communicated that they had a great deal more available and had simply not chosen to use it. Cole was on the floor, face down, a knee between her shoulder blades, her service weapon somewhere. She could not see her hands secured behind her, with the thick yellow zip ties she had seen in photographs of enemy combatant detention. She could hear her own breathing and the hum of the emergency lighting and the systematic sounds of a building being secured around her. Then footsteps, a single set, moving through the precinct at a pace that was neither fast nor slow, the pace of someone who has no reason to hurry because they have already won. She turned her head as much as she could from the floor. Commander James Washington walked through the Cedarville Police Department. He had removed his helmet. His face was visible, angular, controlled, the face of a man who had organized and reorganized his expression into something that gave away only what he chose to give away. He moved through the room, and his eyes moved with him, covering it systematically. He looked at each officer on the ground. He looked at the watch commander's desk, the bullpen, the processing room door. His eyes moved with the specific focus of someone taking inventory of what had been done in a place and who had done it. He did not stop. He did not address anyone. He did not announce himself or explain himself or make any declaration about why he was there. He simply walked through the room with the absolute authority of a man who has been in far more dangerous places than this and has dealt with far more consequential situations than this. And the total weight of that, the unspoken physical weight of it, was more commanding than anything he could have said. His eyes passed over Cole. She felt her breath stop when they did. She had expected anger. She had thought she could manage anger. She had managed angry people before. What she saw in those eyes, for the half second they rested on her, was not anger. It was something colder and more organized. The look of a man who has assessed a situation, made a decision about how to handle it, and is now in the process of executing that decision efficiently and without drama. He looked away from her. "Where is she?" he said to the room. "Conversational volume." Sergeant Hollis answered from somewhere to Cole's left, his voice reduced to its bare factual minimum holding. "Cell 3." James was already moving. His team flowed with him toward the holding area, 2 operators peeling off to maintain watch on the secured officers, the rest moving in the efficient formation of people who have executed variations of this 100 times. Cole heard the holding area door open, heard footsteps, heard another door, and then heard silence for a moment. And then she heard his voice change. She heard it through the wall, muffled but audible, and what struck her, what would stay with her, was that the voice that came through that wall bore no resemblance to the voice that had moved through the bullpen. The commanding officer's voice, the flat and organized and frightening voice that had said, "Where is she?" with the authority of someone who expects the answer immediately, that voice was gone. What came through the wall in its place was something else entirely, something private, something that did not belong to the tactical operation, or to the uniform, or to any of the things that had walked through the bullpen door. She could not make out the words. She could hear the register. She heard a son talking to his mother. She heard what it sounded like when the most dangerous person in the building chose first, before anything else, before addressing any officer, or asserting any authority, or executing any part of his mission, chose to go to his mother. Cole lay on the floor of her precinct and listened to that, and something shifted in her chest in a way she could not have named and would not have been willing to examine for a long time. Dr. Okafor reached Eleanor first. He had the medical kit open before the cell door finished swinging, moving with the efficiency of someone conducting a clinical assessment, while also, underneath the clinical assessment, experiencing something human and specific that his training kept contained but could not eliminate. He spoke to Eleanor in a quiet, steady voice, asking about pain levels, sensation in her fingers. The surgical history he already knew from James's briefing, and Eleanor answered with the directness of someone who has been waiting to be asked these questions for a long time and is relieved to finally have someone asking them. Her right wrist was worse than Okafor had hoped. The nerve compression was evident from the pattern of sensation loss, the thumb, the index finger, the lateral surface of the palm, exactly the distribution of the radial nerve that ran through the area of her surgical scar. The skin above the scar was abraded. Bruising was forming along the path of the handcuff's edge. He was gentle and thorough, and Eleanor let him work without protest, watching the door. James entered. He was still wearing his plate carrier. His face still had the professional mask in place, and then he saw his mother, and the mask did not drop exactly, but it became permeable in the way of something very strong that is nonetheless not made of stone. His eyes moved over her, with the rapid assessment of someone taking inventory, the wrists, the cardigan insufficient for this cold room. The house slippers still on her feet, the particular quality of her posture, straight composed, deliberate, that told him she had been maintaining it consciously for the past 2 hours, and what that had cost her. He crossed the cell and knelt in front of her. He did not say anything immediately. He took her right hand carefully in both of his and turned it gently, examining the bruising and the abraded skin and the position of the scar with the focused attention of someone who has assessed a great deal of damage in his life and has learned to look at it without flinching. His jaw tightened once, a single controlled contraction there, and gone, and then was still. He set her hand down with a care that was completely at odds with the plate carrier and the 8-man team and the 11 officers zip-tied in the bullpen, and he looked at her face. Eleanor Washington had been composed for 2 hours and 19 minutes. Composed on the porch, and in the squad car, and in the processing room, and in the holding cell. She had been composed when Cole had said, "You people," and when Cole had written Jane Doe, and when Cole had said, "Nobody cares." She had been composed because composure was the thing that protected her, the tool that kept anyone from taking anything more from her than the situation had already taken. She looked at her son's face. The composure held, but the edges of it softened just slightly, just at the edges, in the way of something under sustained pressure that has finally found something solid enough to rest against. "Baby," she said. Her voice was the same voice it always was. "I left you a voicemail." "I got it, Mama," he said. "I'm here." He stood. He shrugged out of his tactical jacket, heavy, bulky, more pockets than she could count, and placed it carefully around her shoulders. It was warm. She had not realized how cold she had been until the warmth arrived, and she felt the cold in contrast to it. Then he straightened, and she watched his face change. The sun stepping back, the commander stepping forward as cleanly as a door closing in one room and opening in another. He turned toward the bullpen. "Let's go," he said. Eleanor Washington stood up. She stood with the same deliberate, unhurried dignity with which she had done everything today, which was to say the dignity she brought to every room she had ever walked into in 72 years. Dr. Okafor offered his arm, and she accepted it, not leaning heavily, just using the stability it offered. She settled the jacket around her shoulders. She smoothed the front of her dress with her left hand. She walked out of holding cell 3 in her house slippers, through the Cedarville Police Department, past 11 officers secured on the floor past the processing room where Cole had written Jane Doe on a form, and laughed at the mention of her son past the bullpen where no one had said a word when she was brought in and out into the morning. Her spine was straight. Her head was up. She had not given them her dignity in that processing room, and she was not giving it back now. They stood Cole up. She had been on the floor long enough that her legs were uncertain, and she took a moment to find her balance. And in that moment, in those few seconds of recalibration, she understood with a completeness she had not been capable of that morning how thoroughly everything had inverted. James stood 6 feet away from her. Behind him, Eleanor was seated in one of the precinct's plastic lobby chairs. Okafor still attending to her wrist, the tactical jacket over her shoulders making her look simultaneously small and somehow larger than the room. The operators were positioned around the space at measured intervals, present still not performing, which was somehow more effective than if they had been doing something dramatic. Cole looked at James. She had expected the anger she'd seen in 100 difficult situations, the rising voice, the aggressive posture, the emotion that communicated somebody losing control. She thought she could manage that. She had managed angry people before. What she met in James Washington's eyes was something else entirely. He was looking at her the way a person looks at a problem they have already solved, with a clarity that was not hostile, not performative, not building toward anything. It had already arrived. "Let's talk about this morning," he said. His voice was conversational. It carried through the room. "You received a call about a suspicious person. You did not verify that call. You did not identify the caller or the nature of the reported activity. You drove to 1247 Sycamore Lane and found a woman sitting on her front porch, reading. You did not check the property record, which would have given you the owner's name in approximately 90 seconds. My mother told you her name 3 times. She offered twice to retrieve her ID from inside the house. She asked you a reasonable question about the basis for the stop." He paused. "You interpreted that question as defiance. You called for backup. You placed her in handcuffs. You applied those handcuffs to a documented surgical site she told you about and asked you to accommodate, and you did not accommodate it. You processed her as Jane Doe to create the paperwork impression that she had refused to identify herself." He stopped. "Did I miss anything?" Cole said nothing. There was nothing to say. Each statement was accurate and documented, and he knew it was documented because his team had the documentation. "I didn't know who she was," Cole said finally. The words came out smaller than she intended. James stopped. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone who has been given a statement and has already identified exactly what is wrong with it. "No," he said. "You didn't ask. You decided before you got out of the car." He paused. "She told you that you were making a mistake you couldn't undo." "Do you remember?" Cole remembered. She would remember it for a long time. James stepped back. "Dr. Okafor, what's the medical assessment?" Okafor delivered it the way he delivered all clinical information, factual, precise, without editorializing. Nerve compression consistent with sustained pressure on the surgical site. Scar tissue abraded. Bruising along the handcuffs path. Sensation loss in the thumb, index finger, and lateral palm, the radial nerve distribution. Recommending hospital evaluation for possible nerve study. Physical therapy, minimum 6 weeks. Possible additional intervention depending on recovery. Cole heard each item the way you hear items in a list that is also a reckoning. "She also has a knee contusion," Okafor added, consistent with impact against a hard surface. "The left knee, the car door frame." James nodded once. He looked back at Cole. My mother is 72 years old, he said. His voice was still level, still conversational. The levelness of it was the most frightening thing in the room. She built her porch with her own hands. She paid off her house 12 years ago. She taught children for 38 years, and she knows she has always known exactly what she looks like in this neighborhood to someone who has already decided what she must be before the car door opens. He paused. She told you her name. She offered her ID. She asked a question, and you decided that asking the question was the same as refusing to answer it because you had already written the story before it started. He looked at her steadily for one more moment. She also told you something else, he said, in the processing room, when she told you she had a son. His voice did not change. What did you say? Cole felt the cold of it. The specific arriving cold of something you cannot walk back from. I said nobody was coming, she said, quietly. James looked at her, and yet he said. He turned away from her. Eleanor stood up. She moved slowly. Okafor made a small gesture that she declined with a motion of her free hand, and she crossed the 12 feet between the lobby chair and where Cole was standing. She stopped in front of her. The height difference was substantial. None of it seemed to matter in the way it was supposed to. Eleanor looked at Danielle Cole the way she had always looked at people who needed to understand something important, directly without anger, with a sorrow that was genuine and specific and held no performance in it at all. I taught children for 38 years, she said. I know the difference between someone who made a mistake and someone who made a choice. You made a choice, Officer Cole. On the porch when I told you my name, and you decided not to believe me, that was a choice. When you tightened those handcuffs, that was a choice. When you wrote Jane Doe on that form, that was a choice. She held Cole's gaze. You'll have to live with all of them. That's not punishment. That's just how choices work. She turned and she let her son lead her out. She did not look back. Chief Bernard Sloan arrived at 9:51 in the morning in a state of controlled fury that had 4 minutes to live. Sloan was 56 years old, 11 years running Cedarville. PD experienced enough to have survived 3 mayors, 2 settled lawsuits, and approximately 14 personnel situations that had required diplomacy. He didn't feel like extending. He was not a cruel man. He was a comfortable one, which had over 11 years calcified into a reflexive protectiveness of his department against outside scrutiny. When problems arose within his department, his first question was always how to contain them. He stood in the doorway of his own precinct and looked at the unmarked vehicles outside and the operators in tactical gear, and his officers secured against the walls and the organized efficiency of something that had been planned and executed long before he arrived. And he understood with the clarity of a man whose authority has been completely bypassed that he had been the last to know. Who is in charge here? He said. Identify yourselves immediately. James walked out from the interior of the precinct. Sloan looked at him. James looked at Sloan. The introduction was brief and factual name unit situation. James explained what had been done, what had been documented, and what the legal framework was, the federal statute, the civil rights violation, the evidence that was already secured and already uploaded to a server outside Sloan's jurisdiction or reach. Sloan tried to assert authority twice. Both times James let him finish and then continued, which was more effective than interrupting. Chief, my team has documented the following, James said. 38 arrests made by Officer Cole in the past 6 months. 36 of the arrested individuals were Black or Latino residents of Cedarville. 29 of those arrests were subsequently dismissed for evidentiary or procedural failures. There are also 12 internal complaints against Officer Cole, all dismissed without investigation, and 3 use-of-force incidents in the same period. He paused. My mother was supposed to be arrest number 39. She was selected because Officer Cole calculated correctly, based on prior experience, that she would not have the means to fight it. Another pause. She was wrong about that. Sloan looked past James to Eleanor, who was standing beside Okafor with the tactical jacket over her shoulders and the bruises forming clearly on her wrists and the house slippers still on her feet. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked toward her slowly, with the specific heaviness of a man who has just fully understood what he has been allowing to happen in his department. Mrs. Washington, he said. His voice had changed. The authority was gone from it, and something less comfortable had taken its place. I am deeply sorry for what happened to you this morning. There is no excuse. What Officer Cole did was wrong, and what this department failed to prevent is wrong. He stopped. I'm sorry. Eleanor looked at him. See that it doesn't happen to anyone else, she said. The state police arrived 4 minutes later. Cole was taken into custody. Sloan stood in his own precinct and watched it happen and did not say a single word in her defense. The evidence package left the Cedarville Police Department on 3 encrypted drives at 10:23 in the morning, bound simultaneously for the Georgia State Attorney General's office, the FBI Civil Rights Division field office in Atlanta, and the Georgia ACLU. Williams had it uploaded to the secure federal server before the last zip tie was cut from the last officer. Eleanor was taken to Cedarville General Hospital at 11:15. The emergency room physician reviewed Okafor's preliminary assessment and consulted by phone with the surgeon who had originally performed Eleanor's carpal tunnel repair. The surgeon's conclusion, put in writing in a 3-page report that would later become Exhibit 14 in the federal trial, was that the nerve compression Eleanor sustained was consistent with sustained mechanical pressure applied directly to the surgical site, that the scar tissue had been reopened, and that Eleanor would require 6 weeks of physical therapy with a possible additional procedure if sensation did not return to her right thumb within 60 days. James drove his mother home from the hospital that evening. Not in a government vehicle, not with the team. He had borrowed a rental car from the facility motor pool and changed out of his tactical gear into civilian clothes and made the drive in the quiet company of just the two of them. Which was how it had always been when something important needed to be talked about or sat with, or simply acknowledged in the presence of someone who did not need it explained. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat with her right hand in a soft brace and looked out at the Georgia landscape going dark in the late afternoon. James drove the way he did, everything carefully, without unnecessary movement, paying attention. Are you going to be in trouble? She asked when they were 20 minutes from home. Some degree of it, probably, he said. Stokes has been in communication with people above him since this morning. The working phrase in the documentation is Civil Rights Evidence Preservation Operation. Eleanor nodded slowly. Will it hold? It might, he said. The legal framework is arguable. And the alternative, that I sat on that base and did nothing while you were held unlawfully with nerve damage to your surgical site, is a narrative that nobody in my chain of command wants to defend publicly. She was quiet for a moment. The other thing she said is that what you documented is real. Yes, he said. That's the other thing. He walked her up the porch steps when they reached Sycamore Lane, the same steps Cole had marched her down that morning in handcuffs, and he checked each step before she put her foot on it, without making a production of it, just being careful. He unlocked the front door and walked through the house and checked the windows and the back entrance before he was satisfied, and then he came back to the porch and sat with her. Her coffee cup was still on the table, stone cold now, but still there. The crossword was still there, folded on top of the Bible, 2/3 completed. She looked at the remaining clues. They sat in the dark for a while, without saying much. The neighborhood had gone quiet. A car passed on the street below. The Perryman house across the way had its living room light on, warm and golden. Go, Eleanor said finally. You have a team. They can wait a little longer. James, he looked at her. I know you, she said. Go. He stood. He kissed her forehead, something he had done since he was a small boy, and that neither of them had ever mentioned, as if by mutual agreement. It existed outside the normal accounting of things, and he walked to the rental car and drove away. Eleanor sat alone on her porch for a long time after his taillights disappeared. The October air was cool and clean, and smelled of the sweet gum tree at the end of the block. She found a pen in her cardigan pocket. She picked up the crossword. She started on the harder clues. The United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia occupied a federal building in Atlanta that communicated through every surface the specific weight of institutional authority. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, the formal gravity of a place designed to remind everyone who entered it that what happened here was permanent. The courtroom on the 4th floor was the largest available, and it was requested specifically by the prosecution. Because it was anticipated correctly that this trial would require more room than standard courtrooms provided. Every seat in the gallery was filled by 8:30 on the morning the trial opened. In those seats were people from Cedarville and from Atlanta and from places further away, drawn by the footage that had been released publicly 2 weeks after the arrest and had accumulated in the space of 72 hours a combined view count that the Georgia State Attorney General's communications team described as unprecedented for a civil rights matter in this district. The body cam footage of Eleanor's porch had been watched by people who had never heard of Cedarville, Georgia. The footage of the processing room, the Jane Doe formed the You people, the Nobody Cares, had been watched by people who had heard versions of this story before and were watching this one because this time there was undeniable documentation. In the gallery and seats that had been reserved without announcement was a specific group of people who had never met each other before this week and who shared one thing in common. Harold Park, 79 years old, who had owned a dry cleaning business on Maple Avenue for 26 years and had been detained for 40 minutes outside his own shop by Cole 6 months earlier. Deshaun Williams, 16, sitting beside his mother, stopped 3 times by Cole within 6 blocks of his high school. Maria Rodriguez, 66, who had been cited for disturbing the peace in Cedarville City Park for the act of speaking Spanish to her grandchildren. Cole's prior victims, none of them famous, all of them present. Deputy Marcus Webb sat in the 3rd row. He had resigned from Cedarville PD 6 weeks after the arrest, citing constructive discharge in a written statement that anyone who read it understood was something simpler. He could not work in a place where Eleanor Washington had been processed as Jane Doe and no one had said a word. He was cooperating with the prosecution. He looked nervous and relieved in equal measure, the expression of someone who has made a costly decision and is not sorry. Federal prosecutor Diana Reeves was 39 years old and had been with the Civil Rights Division for 11 years. She had tried 23 civil rights cases and had not lost one. She was the kind of attorney who prepared for trials by knowing more than anyone else in the room and by trusting the facts to do the work that theatrics would only complicate. She did not give an elaborate opening. She walked to the evidence table, picked up a remote, and pressed play. What played was 1 minute and 42 seconds of body cam footage. The courtroom watched it in absolute silence. Eleanor on the porch composed offering good morning, Cole's eyes cataloging her. The question about suspicious activity, Cole's jaw tightening. The handcuffs. The near fall on the steps, the knee catching the doorframe. The voice captured by Cole's own microphone from the driver's seat. You people always think the rules don't apply. Reeves let the room sit in silence for 10 full seconds after the footage ended. She did not fill the silence. She let it fill itself. Then she turned to the jury and said, "What you just watched is not the worst of it. The case took 5 days. The statistical analysis came first." A researcher from Emory University presented Cole's arrest data with the methodical clarity of someone who has organized a very large amount of information into a form that is impossible to argue with. 38 arrests, 36 minority residents, 29 dismissals. The probability that this distribution was the result of random variation statistically indistinguishable from 0. Then came the body cam footage from the prior arrests footage Cole had generated herself on her own camera, apparently without sufficient concern about what it recorded, because the records had always been absorbed by internal review, and the complaints had always been dismissed, and nothing had ever actually happened. Until now. Harold Park at his dry cleaning shop at 7 in the morning, key still in his hand. Cole's voice. "What are you doing here? This business isn't open yet. Are you trying to break in, Harold? This is my store." "I own this store." Cole. "Sure you do." 40 minutes. Deshaun Williams walking home from basketball practice, still in his jersey. Cole pulling up beside him, ordering him to stop. "You match the description of a robbery suspect." Deshaun, 16 years old, turning around and placing his hands on the car with the practiced compliance of a boy who has been taught by people who love him that compliance is the only safety available, while Cole searched him and found nothing and held him for 40 minutes because she had called in a robbery report that when prosecutors went looking for it did not exist. And then Eleanor, the full processing room footage, Cole writing on the form, Jane Doe. Cole's voice, "You people." And then crisp and clear and completely audible on the audio track, "Nobody's coming, Jane Doe." Nobody cares. The prosecutor paused the footage on Cole's face at that exact moment. Her expression in the cold fluorescent light of the processing room, the specific quality of certainty and contempt, and the conviction of someone who has never faced real consequences and has therefore stopped imagining that consequences exist. Reeves let the jury look at that frozen frame. "Nobody cares," she said. That was Officer Cole's assessment of Eleanor Washington, an elderly woman in handcuffs in a cold room. She looked at the jury. She was wrong. You know that because you are here. You know that because 11 months ago, 8 United States Navy operators drove 38 minutes to show her exactly how wrong she was. And you know it because every person in this gallery came here today to tell her the same thing. She paused. Justice is the court's version of the same message. Deputy Webb testified on the third day. He described the bullpen when Eleanor was brought in, no questions, no raised eyebrows, the institutional silence of an environment where this was unremarkable. He described giving Eleanor the phone call without Cole's knowledge. He described his written resignation, which he read from without apology. Eleanor took the stand on the fourth day. She was dressed the way she always dressed for serious occasions, with the attention to presentation that communicated that she understood the weight of where she was. Dark navy suit, her right hand still in a discreet brace under the table. She testified for 2 hours and 12 minutes. She was not dramatic. She did not perform distress. She described what had happened on Sycamore Lane with the precision of someone who has spent her career documenting things accurately, who understands that accuracy is its own argument and does not need embellishment. She described the handcuffs and the nerve pain and the cold of the processing room and the 51 minutes and the red eye of the camera blinking in the corner. She described what she had been thinking sitting alone in that room. "I was thinking about the camera," she said. Her voice was steady and clear and filled the courtroom without effort. "I was thinking that it was recording everything. I have spent 38 years teaching children that the record matters, that what you do becomes part of the permanent account of things that happened, and that account cannot be undone. I was sitting there thinking that Officer Cole was making her record, and I was in it, and that one day what was being recorded was going to mean something." She paused. "I was right," James testified briefly. His testimony was factual, precise, delivered in the register of an officer providing an after-action report. When the defense asked whether his response to the situation had been appropriate, he said, "My mother called me and told me she was in unlawful detention with medical complications from the handcuffs. My response was to retrieve her and to ensure that the evidence of what had been done to her was preserved and could not be altered. I believe those were the appropriate responses." Cole's defense, a tired attorney who had been given an unsurvivable case and knew it attempted to argue good faith, reasonable suspicion, and the complexities of modern policing. Judge Patricia Monroe, a black woman who had been on the federal bench for 22 years and had the specific patience of someone who has heard every version of every argument, allowed the defense to make its case in full. Then, in her ruling on the defense's motion to exclude the statistical evidence, she wrote one sentence that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution made on its front page the following morning. "The court is not persuaded that good faith explains a Jane Doe designation applied to a woman who stated her own name clearly and correctly on 5 separate occasions before that form was created." The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 27 minutes. They returned guilty on all 4 counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, false arrest, filing, false official reports, assault under color of authority. The 4 women read each count in a steady voice, and there was a sound in the gallery after each one, not cheering, but something like the collective exhale of people who have been holding something for a long time. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. Judge Monroe asked Cole to rise. Cole rose. Her attorney stood close, one hand near her elbow. "Danielle Cole," Judge Monroe said, and her voice carried through the courtroom with the particular weight of someone who is not performing authority, but simply exercising it. "You were given a badge by the people of this county. That badge is not a symbol of your power over them. It is their trust in you the trust that you would use the power it carries to protect them, all of them, without exception and without prejudice. She paused. You broke that trust. You broke it not once, but repeatedly over 6 months, with careful attention to selecting people you calculated would not have the resources to fight you. She picked up a document from the bench, Cole's arrest report, the one composed in the Cedarville PD bullpen on Sunday morning. In your report, Judge Monroe said you described Eleanor Washington displaying aggressive behavior and refusing to comply with lawful orders. I have watched the body cam footage from that morning more times than I can count. She set the report down. What I saw was a 72-year-old woman asking a reasonable question, calmly repeatedly, in the voice of someone who has spent her entire professional life maintaining composure in difficult rooms. You interpreted that question as defiance. You interpreted composure as threat. You did this because you had already decided what she was before you got out of the car, and no amount of evidence to the contrary was permitted to revise that decision. Cole's hands were trembling. She could feel it. When she told you her son was in the Navy, you laughed at her, the judge said. You told her nobody was coming. You told her nobody cared. The judge looked at Cole directly. And then her son came. And he brought 8 of the most capable operators in the United States military, and the FBI, and the state police, and eventually, this court. Another pause. You were wrong about all of it, Officer Cole. And the people you were wrong about have sat in this gallery every day of this trial and waited for this moment, not because they wanted your destruction, but because they wanted you to finally understand that they matter, that their names matter, that their home and their porches and their Sunday mornings matter. The sentence arrived. 11 years in federal prison. No parole eligibility for the first 6. Permanent ban from law enforcement in any capacity in any jurisdiction. Full financial restitution to Eleanor Washington, covering medical costs, physical therapy, pain and suffering, and lost time, plus partial restitution to 7 other individuals identified in the statistical review of Cole's prior arrests. Cole's legs gave way. Her attorney caught her. The handcuffs went on. The sound of the ratchet was not loud, but in the specific silence of that moment, it carried through the courtroom, the same sound Eleanor had heard on her porch, the same mechanism now closing around the wrists of the person who had applied it to hers. Several people in the gallery heard it and felt it in the way of something completing a circuit. Cole was led past the front row of the gallery. Eleanor Washington sat in the aisle seat. James sat beside her, his hands folded, his posture straight. As Cole was brought past them, Cole's eyes went to Eleanor. The way eyes go to the thing you cannot help looking at, even when looking, is the last thing you want to do. Eleanor looked back. She did not cheer. She did not smile. She did not offer anything that could be called triumph, because Eleanor Washington had not come here for triumph. She looked at Danielle Cole with the expression of a woman who has witnessed a consequence she did not seek and cannot be glad about, because gladness would require that none of it had happened, and it had happened. She gave her a single nod, small, direct, an acknowledgement, not a victory, of the record complete. Then she looked away. She had a crossword at home with 3 clues still unfinished. She was going to finish them this afternoon. 3 years into her federal sentence at Alderson Prison Camp in West Virginia, Danielle Cole received a letter. By that point, mail call had become one of the structuring events of her week, not because she received much, but because the waiting was a form of time measurement, a way of organizing the otherwise shapeless days into something with edges. Her parents had stopped writing after the 2nd year. Her marriage had not survived the indictment. She received occasional communications from her attorney about the civil proceedings, brief and factual, and their language was a reminder every time of exactly what she had done and the precise dimensions of the damage. The letter came on a Wednesday. Return address, Atlanta, Georgia. The handwriting on the envelope was young and slightly uncertain, the handwriting of someone still developing their relationship with formal correspondence. Cole stared at it for a long time before she opened it. Her daughter Ashley was 22. Cole had not seen her since before the verdict. Ashley had been 18 when Cole was arrested, and she had attended neither the trial nor the sentencing. And the only communication she had sent in 3 years was a single email that said, "I know what you did," I need time. Cole had not responded to this. She had understood with the last remaining clarity she had that she had no standing to. She took the letter to her bunk and sat down and read it. Dear Mom, I know we haven't spoken in 3 years. I know you weren't expecting to hear from me, and I'll understand if you need to put this down before you finish it. But I needed to write it, and I couldn't figure out any other way to do what I needed to do. I'm at the University of Georgia, 2nd year. I'm studying education. I want to be a teacher. I know how that sounds, given everything. I've thought about whether I'm allowed to want it, and I've decided that I am. The problem was paying for it. Dad's business struggled after the trial, and there wasn't enough. I applied for every scholarship I could find and got turned down for most of them. I was looking at debt I couldn't realistically manage when I got a letter from a fund I hadn't applied to. The Marcus Washington Education Fellowship. Full tuition 4 years. Books and housing included. I cried, Mom. I sat in my kitchen and cried because I thought it was a mistake. I looked up the fellowship. It was founded 4 years ago by a woman named Eleanor Washington of Cedarville, Georgia, named after her late husband. The mission says it exists to support students from difficult backgrounds who want to go into education or public service because Mrs. Washington believes people who want to serve others shouldn't be prevented from doing so by the cost of preparation. Mom, I know who Eleanor Washington is. I read everything. I found the court transcripts. I found the body cam footage. I watched all of it. I saw what you did to her. I saw the porch and the handcuffs in the processing room. I heard what you said to her in that cold room. Nobody's coming. Nobody cares. When I found out who was paying for my education, I wanted to send the money back. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I kept thinking I can't take this, not from her. But then I found her victim impact statement from the trial. It's public record. Do you want to know what she said? She said, I taught children for 38 years because I believe people are capable of more than their worst moments. I still believe that. It is the conviction of my life. She said she did not seek to destroy the person who harmed her. She sought to ensure that the institution that allowed it to happen could not allow it to happen again. She didn't write about you by name. She wrote about the institution, about what needed to change, about what she still believed. I'm taking the scholarship. I'm going to become the kind of teacher she was, the kind who sees people really sees them before deciding anything about them, the kind who asks first. The woman you put in handcuffs on her own porch is paying for me to learn how to do that. Tishia. I don't know when I'll write again. I don't know when I'll be ready for more than this. But I needed you to know. I needed you to understand what she chose to do with what you did to her. She didn't use it to destroy you. She used it to build something. Your daughter, Ashley Cole, read the letter 3 times, then a 4th. Her hands were not steady. She set it down on the bunk and pressed it flat with her palm the way of someone insisting on the physical reality of something that does not feel real. The Marcus Washington Education Fellowship. Named after Eleanor's late husband, the man who had measured and cut and laughed when the railing posts came out wrong and had to be started over, the man whose memory Eleanor had carried into her retirement, the same way she carried everything with both hands, carefully not putting it down. Eleanor Washington had taken the worst thing that happened to her and turned it toward something. Not toward Cole's destruction, the system had handled that. Not toward revenge, Eleanor had not appeared to want revenge. Toward something else, something forward-looking, something that would go on after Eleanor was gone and that would keep going, and that Danielle Cole, sitting on her bunk in a federal prison in West Virginia, had not the smallest part in creating. Except she had. She had created it in the specific sense that her choices had been the catalyst. She had created it the way a wrong note creates the silence that makes the right note audible. She had provided the occasion for something she could not have imagined and had not intended and could take no credit for. Cole sat on her bunk for a long time. She thought about the porch, about the wicker chair and the coffee cup and the crossword puzzle and the woman sitting in the October morning with her hands folded, reading the situation with the precision of someone who had spent her entire life learning to read situations, waiting for whatever was going to happen next, with the patience of someone who has learned that patience is its own form of power. She thought about what Eleanor had said in the processing room. I know the difference between someone who made a mistake and someone who made a choice. She thought about Ashley studying education. learning to see people, learning to ask first. The tears came eventually, not the angry tears of self-pity that had come on other nights, the tears of a woman who believed she had been treated unfairly, that the system had overreacted, that the sentence was disproportionate. Those tears had a familiar quality, almost comfortable, because they kept the focus on Cole and what had been done to her. These were different. These were the tears of someone who has been made to see clearly, finally, after a very long time of looking away, and what she saw was specific and detailed and irreversible. She had seen an elderly woman on a porch on a Sunday morning and decided before a single word was exchanged what that woman was and what she deserved. She had not asked. She had not checked. She had not allowed anything that followed to change the decision she'd already made in the car driving down Sycamore Lane. Not Eleanor nor Eleanor's name. Not Eleanor's Adia's address. Not Eleanor's 38 years. Not Eleanor's composure. Not Eleanor's warning. And Eleanor sitting alone in a cold room in handcuffs with nerve damage in her surgical scar had looked at the camera, blinking its red eye in the corner, and thought, good, keep recording, because she had known what Cole had not, that the record always matters. That what you do becomes part of the permanent account of things that happened in the world, and that account cannot be undone. That if you build something carefully enough and true enough, it will outlast the people who tried to stop you from building it. Cole picked the letter up again. She folded it carefully along its original creases and slid it under her pillow. She would read it on the hard nights. She would read it every time she was tempted to reconstruct the story in a way that made her into something other than what she had been. She would read it because it was the truest document in her possession, truer than the verdict or the sentence or the civil judgment, because it was written by her daughter. And it said what Ashley had seen when she looked at what Cole had done, which was the clearest mirror Cole had ever been given. 8 more years. 8 more years, and then the world again. A world in which Eleanor Washington had built a fellowship, and Ashley Cole was learning to be a teacher. A world in which the record of Sycamore Lane on a Sunday morning in October was part of the permanent archive of things that had been done and seen and documented and answered for. 8 more years to try to understand what it meant that the woman she had put in handcuffs on her own porch had refused to let that be the end of the story. Eleanor Washington returned to her porch on Sycamore Lane. The wicker chair had a new cushion blue like the old one, and her coffee was black same as always, and the October light moved through the oak trees the way it always did, dappled and unhurried. Her right hand, the one Cole's handcuffs had damaged, had regained most of its feeling after 8 months of physical therapy. Not all of it. The small patch on her thumb's lateral surface about the size of a coin stayed numb. The surgeon said it might improve. It might not. Some things do not fully come back, and Eleanor had decided she could live with that, the same way she had decided she could live with a great many things that did not fully come back. The Marcus Washington Education Fellowship awarded its 7th scholarship that spring. Eleanor did not publicize this. She reviewed the applications herself on Sunday afternoons at the kitchen table with her reading glasses and her black coffee, selected the recipients on the criteria she had thought carefully about, and written down and mailed the letters herself. She waited for the phone calls. The phone calls were her favorite part, the particular quality of a young person's voice the moment they understood that something they had been told was impossible had quietly, without ceremony, become possible. She listened to each of them describe what they were going to study and why, and what they planned to do with the time and the money and the chance they had been given. She thought about Marcus each time, who had believed that the most important thing you could do with whatever you had built was to build something with it that would outlast you. Officer Danielle Cole had 8 years remaining on her federal sentence. She kept Ashley's letter under her mattress and read it on the hard nights, which were most nights. Eleanor Washington had not forgiven her. That was Eleanor's business and no one else's. And Cole had learned slowly, at some cost, and not without resistance, that it was not hers to ask for. What Eleanor had done instead was refuse to let Cole's choices take anything further from her than they had already taken, and then build something with what remained. There is a difference between forgiveness and refusal to be diminished, and Cole was only now 8 years in, beginning to fully understand what that difference looked like from the inside of it. The letter was still under her mattress. She still read it. Some things take the entire sentence to learn. If this story moved you, if Eleanor's grace stayed with you, subscribe to our channel. We share more stories about justice, accountability, and the people who refuse to let the worst thing that happened to them be the last thing. Hit the like button, ring the notification bell, and tell us in the comments Eleanor found out who her scholarship was going to. She kept sending the checks anyway. Could you have done the same thing? We want to know.